work for a full-time individual to do this, so they contract with somebody to do the job. And the Department of Justice comes to us and says, we've got an opinion that this is contrary to the Oregon Constitution and you can't do that. So the bill comes forward. I start getting phone calls from some of my small communities saying, look, I guess it sounds like a great idea to have the county select somebody who can work in cooperation with all our small communities, but the county seat is half an hour away, and we're going to be waiting a lot longer for those inspections to get completed. So they're urging me to vote no on the bill. And meanwhile, I've got other colleagues, legislators, that are coming to me and saying, well, you took an oath to uphold the Constitution, and we're being told the Constitution clearly says you can't do this. So now you're me, and you get to push the red button or the blue or the white or the green button. You get to vote yes or you get to vote no. Do you get to vote maybe in the Oregon legislature? Everybody together says no. We don't get to vote maybe. We don't get to vote I don't know or I don't want to decide. You have to vote yes or no. And this bill passed by what kind of margin? Anybody recall? Came out of the House about 40. Came out of the House 48-6. Yeah, 48-6. I was one of the 6. And then it went over to the Senate, where it just never came out of committee and died, which leaves us where we are here today. So I think what we need is, first of all, a clear understanding of what the Constitution requires or doesn't require, so we know what steps to take next. Did I miss something, Patty?
No, I just want to say that I want to thank my city officials, both elected and city employees, for stepping forward on this. They were really all in. I know I have people here on the panel today that represent my district, and this has been a really difficult one, and I'm looking forward to 2019 and us coming forward with a solution to it. But it's complicated, it's not easy. I want to give folks credit who actually pushed the pause button on this for us when we asked them to make sure that we got it right. But we've got some work to do, so we'll look forward to being engaged. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you very much. I think that Representative Gomberg's comments set up now, the comments are pointed, and I apologize, to give us the status of where we are. And I hope you'll mention a little bit what gave rise to building codes suddenly deciding that they had to call the question, and what was the predicate to their first inquiry to the AG that deemed a practice that is decades old now, quote, unconstitutional.
Just to that point, this issue started a number of years ago when a city had made application to DCBS, our Building Codes Division, to move basically to a third party that they wanted to take on their own. And so there were some issues with that particular application that caused us to deny it. We look at things about what's the economic issues, if there are concerns for the county. Anyway, we denied that application as an agency. That city appealed, which resulted in a lawsuit against the agency. DOJ got involved at that time because they were reviewing it because we now had a pending lawsuit. That's when they started to ask about the practices, which led to, wait a minute, you can't do that. So that started the initial understanding that there could potentially be an issue. Well before we got to the legislation that was introduced in 2017, then there was an interim work group that tried to resolve some of those issues. The 2017 bill was not successful. An interim work group moved to 2018. We've heard during that in 2018, during that session, there was a legislative council opinion that gave some question to some constitutional issues about that. Followed by that, there was written opinion, and I think it came after long discussions with many of the people on the panel about some of those issues. DOJ gave us their advice. It wasn't a formal opinion, it's advice from what we would say our contact counsel, the attorney that helps with building codes issues, that said, yes, indeed, we think that there are some parts of this that are unconstitutional. As an agency, we're listening to our attorneys and hearing this doesn't work the way it is, as it's unconstitutional. We didn't have a legislative fix for that at that point. we felt like we needed to make some changes in order to be in compliance with what we were hearing of that, the legal issues. And so the administrative rules came out that were temporary administrative rules. Those happened really quickly, understanding that there was not that conversation, but we didn't feel that there was the time to have that conversation. And to the legislators' point, that's when there was a lot of concern raised. The governor's office, as well as the legislators, heard those issues. Comments to our director, Cameron Smith, and working closely with the governor's office, we put a quick pause on that. Again, I know that there was a lot of concern because even the secondary administrative rules that came out didn't allow for time to have conversation. A lot of that was because the first administrative rules put a very quick timeline on that, the end of May, and when we repealed the rules, we needed to have at least some protections, the minimum that we could do, so there wasn't really time. When Cameron had asked building codes to put a halt on the rules and take another look at that, it was very quickly done, and so we absolutely understand that that was not a process. As a part of that, I think everyone knows, as the senator had mentioned, we've asked Department of Justice to have a more formal opinion of that. And there's been much concern about what's the question being posed. And again, Cameron Smith, our director, has worked very closely with the governor's office and very thoughtful about how we're asking that question. And there is an initial broad question about public entities being able to contract generally. It is not, that first question is not necessarily just to building codes, but very open about that. And then some supplemental questions that speak to building services and trying to put some sideboards around it. That set of questions has been posed to the Department of Justice. As we said, we don't have an answer yet. We don't know what that answer is going to be. So now we're at that point of waiting. Again, we know that that has the possibility of having a much bigger impact than building services on cities, counties, state government agencies for that question. So we are kind of on pause right now until we have more information. But a part of that will be when we do get an opinion, depending on what happens. It's why we really need to work together, because there's that balance of what happens to the local governments, what happens for builders and contractors. I think that Scott will probably speak to that a little bit of, there's that balance of validity of permits versus the constitutional issues about what happens with the programs.
I'm going to exercise the prerogative of the moderator and ask you a question. Early on, there was a lot of consternation about getting a copy of the DOJ opinion. This was early on when Mark Long had first asked for the opinion. Do you consider the questions that you have posed this time to be protected by attorney-client, or would you make them available to help inform a wider discussion?
Senator, I don't have an answer for that, so I am happy to go back and ask that question just to find out if there is any issue around that.
Thank you, because I think that the absence of transparency has been very frustrating, certainly to legislators, and I imagine some of the participants. Unless anybody objects, I'm going to stick with the people that are listed in the front part of this panel before we go to the second part, just so I can do air traffic control on who's speaking. And on behalf of a number of cities, I'm going to ask Ms. Doyle from the League of Oregon Cities to make her opening statement and any comments that are germane to this subject.
Thank you, Senator. And thank you to the Coastal Caucus for hosting this beginning of this conversation. I think transparency and conversation are going to be a way to finding the solutions that we're all seeking so that we can have a safe and healthy building program that ensures the health and safety of all of our citizens. That's the goal of everyone that's participating in this process. From our perspective at the League, we were introduced to this issue in a very surprising sort of way. The third-party providers came to us and asked us for support in 2017 of a bill related to a certification process, which their inspectors have a specialized certification but they were soon going to be able to not use it to perform some very specific types of inspections. And we said, well, we're paying you to do those inspections. We would like you to continue doing those inspections. We're all in. And as that process unfolded, the bill didn't move in 2017, but we agreed to go to a work group to have this conversation about what was going to happen with these certifications for third-party providers. And it was at that point, as we were sitting into our first work group meeting, that we found out that there was a broader constitutional question that had been asked, and it had been implied that it had been answered. And we had not been informed, and we didn't know what the basis was for it. And this was going to impact both cities and counties who had contracted out to building officials who are third parties. And so the League of Oregon Cities, the Association of Oregon Counties, sat down with the Building Codes Division and the Department of Justice. I just used half of the acronyms. And we asked to have that legal conversation. And I will say the transparency question became very apparent for us as we thought we were talking as attorneys to attorneys, and we were being told privilege, privilege, privilege. And our attorneys were in the room, and they respect and understand that attorney-client privilege is very important. But we felt we weren't really getting anywhere. And then through the process of the work group, we ended up with House Bill 4086. And I apologize, I meant to bring copies of it, but I left my office on Monday and forgot I wasn't going back on Tuesday. But that bill was more robust than we were expecting, and then was amended to become even further more robust, which would have really limited the options for a number of our smaller jurisdictions that have relied upon third-party building inspection programs pretty reliably for decades, and never realized that there was any question as to whether or not what we were doing was correct. And there are restrictions, there are rules on what local governments can do that are going to run those programs, and if the question is that we're not running them properly, there are mechanisms by which we felt the Building Codes Division could, do the fiscal analysis, make sure that we're running above board. But the constitutional question was one that we didn't really anticipate. It's one that we didn't actually do. When we did our own legal analysis, was we didn't agree with the opinion that DOJ had provided us. We believe that the department, we ask, and the department must give us permission to run these programs. And so it's less of a delegation in our mind, as more of our assumption of a program at the local level. We agree that the building code itself is a statewide building code, that the state sets that through their board's process. That's not what we're asking to change. But that at the end of the day, our cities that were looking for fast, accurate, economical returns for permits, we're getting that service out of third parties and less so out of the counties, because the counties have to cover a much larger territory and can't always get to every small community as often as we can pay someone to come and do that. So we were hoping to make sure that we could keep those efficiencies both in cost and time for the building communities to ensure that we had the housing going up that we needed, the economic development to move forward. And so that was our approach. And then I will say, as we went through this process, we felt every time we thought we had a handle on what the process was going to look like, where it was going to come out, we were hit with another robust change, that we didn't have confidence in the answers we were being given because we weren't informed that this was even possible. So, for instance, we were told at one point that COGS, the councils of government that service a number of our smaller communities as a separate governmental entity, were going to be able to help out with some of this. And then at the end of the day, that was a no. And so every time we thought we had an idea of what was coming forward, something different happened. And so I think what we're really seeking is to have a collaborative conversation to come up with a real solution that allows our local governments to provide the services necessary within their communities without trying to break the budget, particularly in a time when we can barely find building officials and building inspectors to hire, let alone afford the prices that they can command because of the rarity of their skills and certifications.
Thank you very much. I now turn to Rocky Dallum with the Tonkin Torp firm. I know, Rocky, you have been at the ground zero on many of these discussions, and with your legal perspective, maybe you would share with us what you see as part of the problem statement here. Just so the others can be informed, rather than breaking this into state the problem and then get to the problem solving, I want to give all of you a chance to state the problem from your perspective. So for those of you that are in the second list of presenters, I'm going to come to that question as well. So, Mr. Dellum.
Thank you, Senator. And I'm, as she mentioned, Rocky Dellum, and I represent two small family-owned businesses, Northwest Code Professionals and the Clare Company, who've both been in the building inspection plan review business on behalf of local governments for almost 40 years, really since we went to a statewide building code. And don't want to lose sight of that. Obviously, our clients are the cities and the counties, and what cities and counties do is important, but I think we're also always talking about small business in Oregon and how we want to make sure that we're protecting those people who have those jobs, and they're just as important as the other jobs in the conversation. So I don't want to lose sight of what this actually means for our clients. There used to be several more, or significantly more, third parties who provided these services to jurisdictions, but have slowly dilapidated and fallen off the board over the years. So that's my personal bias, is my clients are looking to continue the business and provide the stellar service that they have. You've already heard it. This really is a statewide issue. Obviously, we're here at the coast and have these members here who mentioned their cities. We were out, several of us, in Frontier, Oregon earlier in the summer, and heard the same from Representatives Barreto and Finley, who have small cities and actually very large counties that have their own challenges. And so this is really a statewide issue. And not to leave the big cities out, as Aaron mentioned, there are large jurisdictions, City of Portland, City of Salem, City of Eugene, who will hire third parties for various services for overflow purposes too. I think Aaron captured this probably pretty well, which is what we're all for here. Everyone agrees in a statewide uniform code that we can all apply, and that we need the safest, most efficient permitting system that we can get. That's what the construction industry wants, that's what our clients want, that's what the cities and counties want, because we all hear about it when it doesn't work that way. And to do that, we really do need to leverage all four of the entities involved, which is the state level with the Building Codes Division of DCBS, the county level, the city level, and then the third-party contractors who are either providing full building official services or other inspection services. This did start from our perspective. We brought a bill, as Aaron had mentioned, in 2017 through an amendment that happened late in the legislative process back in 2013. There was a sunset coming that wouldn't allow small cities to contract out for a certain type of inspector, and wouldn't allow the large jurisdictions to contract for overflow for those same inspectors. It was a narrow problem that we wanted to fix, and we were told about halfway through session. I think Nancy summed it up well, as we can't fix this problem because we've got a whole other issue that we've got to solve. We went to a work group. To avoid getting into all the details or particulars, if you're here and you know about those details, you don't need to hear them from me, and if you don't, it gets very complex very quickly when we talk about building codes. But really, I think a few themes have been captured here, and at least a perception that I've learned from the local government level and our clients, which is these problems around Building Codes Division rules and Building Codes Division statutory changes all seem to happen either through emergency rulemaking. And if you look at our statute, well, I don't get into the details, is our statute has become a Frankenstein over the last 8 or 10 years on certification and training for inspectors. And unfortunately, it's never come through bills that DCBS has proposed at the beginning of session. It's always in response to a bill proposed by cities, counties, or third parties trying to get more flexibility to better serve the construction industry. So I think that you've heard the themes already. If we can figure out how we can ensure that our businesses stay in business and provide the great service they do to cities and counties, we need to do that, and clearly the legal opinion will have some effect on that. But I think that there's other pieces that we can all get some consensus around and work together towards in 2019, and won't get into solutions yet, but we definitely need a consensus process. And Senator Johnson, you said it right, having us all talking to one another rather than about one another is where it starts. We need some consistency and some clarity, and we really do need transparency. There have been a lot of challenges in reacting to rules by the cities and our clients. There have been a lot of challenges in understanding the legislative process when new amendments are coming forward, opinions, and I think there's at least a lack of trust and a perception from many that that we're reacting during the heat of session and can't get the information up front, and it always seems to be a reaction rather than a forward-looking process. So we look forward to having policy discussions, having the legislators here and in Salem figure out what the best policy is for a safe, efficient building permitting system at all levels, as opposed to the other way, having it driven by sort of late-minute changes in session or through the rules. So that's what we're hoping for.
Thank you very much. Mr. Berry, it's your folks that build domiciles. Would you comment, please?
Is this on? Oh, there we go. I'm not sure that our issue really is with the third parties or the small cities. I don't think it is. We've worked for years in those smaller jurisdictions. I think somewhere around 4%, 4 to 5% of permits come out of jurisdiction using the third-party inspection system. It may be larger than that. I'm hearing some rumblings over here, but the point for us is, and we weren't really in the middle of this discussion fight early on. We work with the small cities, we work with third parties, have for years. I think we got a little more involved late in the process when we started seeing the opinions coming out from First Legislative Council. That's the first one that I saw, followed by the Attorney General's office. And since then, in the last month or so, we've gone out and got an opinion from another attorney, Greg Chamoff, who used to be down at Legislative Council. And our concern is the validity of the permits. In other words, are the permits being issued by small jurisdictions who do not have a separate employed building official that is an employee of the city? Are those permits valid? And I can't find a legal opinion that says they are, unfortunately, right now. And so you can imagine from our perspective as the contractors, if I'm not pulling a legal permit, then that means the permit that homeowner is getting for the remodel, the permit that that is then turning into a new home that's being purchased. I mean, this is about the consumers and the people who are ending up with those homes. Can those homes be financed legally by the banks? Can they be sold by realtors if realtors are aware that there may be concerns about the legality of those permits? These are huge issues for us, obviously. I think the only frustration we have right now is the lack of clarity and kind of waiting for that final opinion. And my understanding is that opinion is going to be much more broad than just the building code issues. And that may be part of the reason why it's taking a little bit longer. But for us, the real concern on the ground is, are we being given valid permits? And I'll break that down just briefly and say, the reason they potentially, in the opinions that I've read, the three, may not be valid are that Building Codes Division doesn't have the authority to give that program to a particular city that doesn't meet certain requirements. And that basically is that so far, the legal opinions I've seen again believe that that building officials have both the authority to back up a building inspector and or to change that opinion. So you end up with a discretionary decision made by the building official. And that building official has the authority to override an electrical inspector, for instance. So if we end up in a scenario where the city manager becomes the building official, I'm not sure where the knowledge base is to override the electrical inspector, the plumbing inspector, or the structural inspector, based on the knowledge that they probably don't have. And it is not a lack of confidence in those third-party inspectors. We believe they're well-trained and understand what they're doing, but that's not the building official, at least the way we're being told the interpretation of law is. So it's a great concern for us, and I would say every day more and more permits are being issued under this system. And so every day we have more and more potential consumers and homeowners and subcontractors who are picking up some potential liability, and that's kind of our concern. That's our chief concern right now.
Thank you. As we move now into the second group of individuals listed, as out of respect for a fellow elected, I'm going to give first shot to Commissioner Bozovich from Lane County Commissioner. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Johnson. You know, this is a really complex issue, but it's an issue about a system that has functioned for over 30 years. I have yet to hear an example of a fire, building collapse, or major structure issue from a third-party building official issued permit or inspection. So we're solving a problem that really isn't there in some ways, other than one that's been made through a legal process. And that's where it gets to me. Is there really a problem? Because you have to accept the premise that we're being told that this is an unconstitutional delegation of discretionary authority. And at least from my viewpoint, my legal counsel's viewpoint, we don't agree with that premise. So one of the things we need to do first is talk, lawyers to lawyers, about how we're dissecting that law and whether we can come to an agreement on how that law actually looks and whether it is a constitutional issue. Because if we don't talk now, we're going to litigate it later. And as I look at, I've got 4 cities in my district that contract. Fortunately, a couple of them have kind of worked things out. Benita's going to contract with Cottage Grove, but now they're down to 2 days a week. They have inspections available. Junction City is going to hire a building official and contract with a bunch of other cities to try and afford to have it there. We'll talk about Florence in a minute, but Dune City, which doesn't have a permanent tax base, is planning on saying, we're going to be the poster child. Sue us. So that's kind of the spectrum we have. And at the same time, we're also being told that even though ORS 190 specifically says councils of governments can do anything the entities that form them can do, we're being told they can't function as that umbrella for building officials. So that's where some of those issues of transparency and distrust come. But we're in the middle of a housing crisis. And yes, it might be 4 or 5% of building permits, although I've been told it's higher. If you're one of those 4 cities in my district, it's 100% of your building permits. And they're all struggling with workforce housing, low-income housing, just housing in general. So we need to talk about this, we need to resolve it, and particularly we need to talk up front about the base issue in this, and that's the legal analysis. We need to get together with AOC's lawyers, LOC's lawyers, our lawyers, DOJ, and really work out, is this truly a constitutional crisis?
Thank you very much. With apologies to Mrs. Applegate and Jorgensen and Ms. Reynolds, I'm going to give the next shot at this to my constituent and friend, Mr. Hinkleman, from the city of Claxton.
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate it. When I first heard about this issue, my German, Scotch, and Irish temper blended, and I did my best impression of Mount Vesuvius and blew my top. After I got over that, which was only 3 days ago, I agree that there has to be a discussion to work this issue out. And to give this perspective to my legislative colleagues here, appreciate you folks being here, there are more people on this stage than work for the city of Clatskanie. I have 9 employees, 5 of them are my public works guys. And for me, with having a 4-person office staff, to have one of them become the building official, I don't have the time or the money to send them to training. Do I have to hire somebody, which is something that's been kicked around there? Well, I'm going to invite whoever made that decision that we have to hire somebody to come down to Clatskanie, and I'll let them make the decision of who is going to be laid off, because I'm not going to make that decision. So there's got to be a work here. And I'm also worried about the macro, what I call the macro issue, and I testified this before the legislature, and that is, where does this end? And what I mean by that is, I also hire out a third-party vendor for my city attorney. I also hire out a third-party vendor for my city planner. Next week, my public works crew is going to be doing phase 5 of a sewer line replacement. We have to hire a guy with a big excavator to do the digging. Do I have to have him as an employee? Because he's a third-party vendor, and I can't use third-party vendors because of a constitutional issue. So, these are the things that I would like the legislature to look at. I want to see building codes, Nancy, for you folks to figure out, in conjunction with everybody, how to work this out so I can continue to use building inspections. Classic example, I use Jack's firm. And on Monday, I submitted a building permit for a new skate park roof. I'm replacing the skate park roof in the city of Clatskanie. The vendors are starting on Friday.
If I would have had to submit that building permit to the county, it would be several weeks before I would have gotten that building permit back. So in terms of...
As long as he's qualified. If we can start with this simple spot right there and take a look at how that's written and look at what we can possibly do in the future, I think that is a big benefit for our industry. And the last thing I want you to really take more seriously than anything else maybe today is that within 30 years, 85% of our code officials across the country are going to retire. That's the age that they're at. And so that study was done in 2014 by the International Code Council, and since then the numbers are not looking better, they're looking worse. So I've been working on tons of programs with military families with the International Code Council, trying to bring them into our industry. I know the home builders they've just funded a bunch of work to get people into their industry, but the number of inspectors available in Oregon is not going to get better. It's going to get much, much worse, and it's going to be the biggest collapse we will see in economic development will be that enormous pause because of that. So we need to be able to work together. We need third-party inspectors. We need great city inspectors and great county inspectors and state inspectors. We need all of those in order to function well. And please, if we get nothing else today, let's get at the table. I haven't had one sit-down meeting with the division. You know, before these rules came out, in the middle of when the rules came out, I haven't had one good sit-down meeting with our industry partners. I think we were all just trying to wrap our heads around everything. But we really need to get to the table as a group, just like we do in the consensus process when we write the international building codes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to invite Erin Reynolds, the city manager of the city of Florence.
Thank you. Everyone's posed nicely the problem or the perceived issues here at hand. At the city of Florence, we do contract out our building official and building inspector. We have on-site and hired on-staff a building permit tech and a fully functioning 5-day-a-week office that handles things in person, and then of course relies on the third-party contractor to do the building official and building inspector technical work. So I just wanted to set that stage, but more importantly, I wanted to share the lens in which I work from. This is a conference on coastal economic summit and focus on rural, and I really think this is one of those issues that nicely showcases the difficulties of living in rural Oregon. My city is obviously rural and coastal, but what that means is I'm an hour plus away from our county seat in Lane County, Eugene, Oregon. And furthermore, on a good day, we're about 2.5 hours away from the state capitol. And it's not 2.5 hours on an easy drive down I-5 and some stop and go traffic. It's 2.5 hours driving across many rivers, bridges, down I-5, down 126, which is a single lane rural highway, over a mountain and to the coast. So you can sing the song along with me, over the river and through the woods, to grandmother's house we go. But in Florence, Oregon, we may be a small percentage, but we're still a city trying to provide services to our residents. And so instead of stating a problem, I'd like to say what our goals are. Our goals are to be a professional city following rules and state law to the best of our ability in a financially responsible manner. And we want to be just like everybody else. We want a thriving building community. We want to be economically strong. And in order to do that, it is imperative that people have legal building permits and that they don't have to wait a very long time. Right now at the city of Florence, you can get your residential building permit in less than 10 days. That's because we do have services 2 days a week, more if absolutely necessary, and that's working really well for us. It's working for us financially, and it's meeting the needs and expectations of our residents. Anything that threatens that, we are going to be advocating for a solution. And that's what happened on April 23rd when we got rules that said what we were doing was wrong and it needed to stop and that we needed to change. And so, like my counterpart here, of course we paid attention to that, and we will continue to work on that issue. And I thank the Coastal Caucus for helping us out and standing and giving us time. We're here and ready to look for a solution that again provides a timely, cost-effective service to our building community, and of course the end result of the person who buys the product. We want to provide a great product.
Thank you very much. And now, last but not least, Mr. Jorgens.
Really happy to be here. So I started as city recorder for the city of Aurora in mid-March. This was after 5 years of working in the legislature. And here I thought I was done working with lobbyists and legislators and agencies, as much as I've enjoyed working with many of you over the years. And within days of starting, I was informed that, hey, well, it looks like we won't be able to issue building permits anymore. And I was absolutely appalled. And it wasn't just about the city of Aurora for me. Many of the cities that were affected by this were places like Jacksonville, Rogue River, right, Estacada, places that I'd worked as a reporter in my early 20s. And I watched these communities struggle through years and arguably decades of recession. And we're finally at the point where we're starting to see investment in rural Oregon. We're seeing job creation. We're seeing businesses being built. And the bottom line is that it's working for us. Yes, we use a private party for these things. We do pre-application conferences, and this involves the use of my third-party planner and our third-party engineer. And we get everybody in the same room, we get them on the same page, and it's a work of art, right? And by the time everybody leaves, they're happy, everyone's on the same page, and it's working. And that's the bottom line. Aurora is a town of about 920 people, and we have, over the next couple of years, 3 businesses coming in that between all of them are going to create 80 jobs. 30 of those jobs are either administrative or electrical contracting positions, right? These are the exact kinds of jobs that cities like this need. Within the next few weeks, we're going to have a world-class restaurant opening up in Aurora. That should be about mid-October, Filbert's Farmhouse Kitchen, right? Love to have you all come and visit and eat. I'm really looking forward to it, and so are a lot of folks. And I think a lot of the exception that the city's had was the way in which this was done. I would have been more than happy to participate in a rulemaking process. I participated in legislative work groups that resulted in bills being passed unanimously through both chambers, unamended, while a member of the super minority party, right? So, and look, I don't want to have to go back to Salem, and I cannot emphasize this enough. Right? I did 5 years, I'm done. I would just as soon not have to bother any of you. Right? And I'm pretty sure that I have the personal cell phone numbers of most of the people up here. And if I don't have them, I can get them. Yeah, you too, man. Yeah. Right? Hey, you were one of the ones I called. And that was what happened when I found out about this. I said, well, gee, I know legislators, I know lobbyists. Looks like I'm gonna have to call some folks. And most of you called me back, you know, and I really appreciate that. But really, you know, I'd be more than happy to participate to help find a solution. But, you know, the way in which this is done, you're sitting there running your small city and you get from the state of Oregon a notification of potential investigation, right? So this is how you start your workday, is with this on your desk, and it's kind of terrifying. And then it's accompanied by this delegation standards checklist. And I'm sitting there going through this thing going, you know, I spent years in the legislature working with these agencies, asking for a fraction of this accountability from agencies with budgets much larger than ours, with much more personnel than ours, and being told, well, gee, that's impossible. You need to give us millions more dollars so we can hire more people. And so we got a completely different standard being applied to cities of fewer than 1,000 people. So I'm glad that we're all here, especially because it's the coast, and it's nice, and this is a good time. I've had a great time. But really, I'd be more than happy to work with everybody here to find something that works for everybody. And if I could avoid going to Salem during the legislative session, I would appreciate it, and you guys probably would too. I really don't want to go. I cannot emphasize that enough.
Thank you very much. So, thank you, panel. We have spent the first hour hearing comments from this eclectic and mixed group. Absent only our friends at Labor. I was called by IBEW on Tuesday as I left to come down here, so I just want to acknowledge that for the record. I'm going to take a page out of former Commissioner Mark Labhart's book and do something fairly dangerous. As the moderator, I'm going to summarize what I think I have heard, hoping to head towards some consensus about action items to move forward. And as I tick these off, I'm going to invite anybody who objects to raise their hand or speak out. Otherwise, I'm going to take your silence as consensus. So here goes. This is pretty dangerous stuff. To the agency, there appears to be a complete lack of trust and transparency. And I am going to respectfully ask that this issue get elevated to the director level and ask for Cameron Smith's personal engagement as we try to work through some of the issues. So that would be the first one. The second one is, I don't know about the totality of the record. I don't know whether all of you now are in possession of every element of the record, absent the latest request to the AG. Do all of you have a full copy of the record? Okay, Greg, what's missing? What don't you have?
I don't know exactly what I don't have. So I've got stuff that's been sent out by Aaron, so if that's complete, then I do have the complete record.
Okay, Aaron?
To the best of my knowledge, I have shared with everyone what I have seen. There's things in OLIS that I think I've sent around. You guys have gotten the letters directly. Sometimes I get the information from you, which I also appreciate, the letters from BCD and the process for the temporary rules that have come through. So to the best of my knowledge, I have what's available and publicly available.
Okay, so I'm going to, unless there's objection, suggest that Aaron be considered the repository of the record for right now. And if people in the audience are desirous of having the record, please send Aaron an email request, and if it gets overwhelming, send up a flag. Any objection to that?
I would like to object, but I think it's the right
No, you don't have to object. The next thing that I'm going to ask is that the agency, as quickly as possible, ascertain whether or not the request to the AG is going to be considered a private attorney-client communication. And now I'm going to editorialize. If, in fact, this is an issue of constitutional question, it matters to every single Oregonian. And I don't know why we would want to stand on attorney-client privilege if we are trying to work through an urgent and pressing problem on behalf of all Oregonians. So that's my editorial. And I'm going to respectfully ask that you get that information to Erin, given that I have designated her as the quarterback. Okay, next up. This panel has been recorded. I don't know who owns the recording, whether it's part of the conference or if this is a private camera. Can you answer that for me back at the sound panel?
This is David Dolly, and he was authorized by the
I can't hear you at all. If it would be possible for you to get that information down here. What I'm going to suggest, unless there's objection, if this is a public document, the tape that's been taken, I'm going to respectfully ask that every member of this panel receive a copy of it. Put your hand up if there's an objection. Are you cool with that? Okay, it looks like everybody's okay. So that's going to happen. And we'll get that from the conference organizers. The next thing is that I think we need to get some clarity around the composition of the work groups and rule promulgation. Who sets the table, who's at the table, and how can we assure that there is a level playing field for all points of view? Any objection to that? And I would ask the agency to comment on how the work groups are forming. I can't control what other legislators do as far as work groups, but I think we've got the House and the Senate reflected here, and to ask that we try to get some standardized work group format so that you guys aren't running from one work group to the next, but we all collectively put our heads together and try to get work groups that are comprehensive and represent all opinions. The next thing that I think we should respectfully ask for is that we get all the lawyers in the same room. I have already, God forbid, I have already heard thinly veiled declarations that legal options or administrative law options might be a solution. There are a couple of us that are Ways and Means legislators. We are stewards of the public pocketbook, and to waste in litigation what we might be able to solve with a properly set table and adequate conferencing between lawyers to resolve some of these opinions. And that's not to say that I don't respect DOJ, but there may be differing legal opinions, and so would any of you object to trying to figure out how to ask the agency to set the table with the lawyers that might be able to have some dialogue with their lawyer, who is the DOJ. Any objection to that? Mr. Dollar?
No objection. I think someone down the panel clarified it would be good to have the lawyers talk before publicizing for all the risks Scott talked about, is that we can get some agreement or some framing of the legal issues before posting things on OLIS or releasing them through rule, and that's been a major challenge. You know, a cynic might question why there's a legal opinion after 35 years, and I say that sort of, you know, blatantly honestly, is why did we call a legal question? So we would hope that the agency and the Department of Justice would be able to talk collectively with all the lawyers before publishing something that could cause liability or risk for the industry.
In your opinion, Mr. Dowling, who ought to set that table? Given that DOJ represents the agency, would it be on the agency to convene other lawyers, or how would you do that?
I think if the agency were in charge of ensuring that we could get their DOJ lawyers and front office DOJ lawyers in the room with the AOC, LOC, and third-party lawyers at the same time. I think that was a challenge we had from August through December of last year, was getting both front office and agency lawyers. So I think we can trust Nancy to coordinate with Aaron and me, and I know the county's lawyers are probably concerned about that too.
Aaron, Nancy, do you have a comment?
And we are happy to ask. I can't guarantee that DOJ is going to agree to that. You know, we will coordinate that. We'll pose that question, and we'll work with Cameron on that.
Which now brings me to my next point, and that is, I think we need to more heavily involve the governor's office, specifically James LaBar, who has now been tasked by the governor to help resolve the housing issue. In the 3 days that I've been here, I can't tell you how many times I have heard lamentation about the paucity of workforce housing, let alone veterans and other specialty need housing. If this issue is an impediment to putting people in safe, secure housing, this rises, in my opinion, to the level of a statewide crisis. Okay. That was the end of my list. I would now invite any of you to make additions to that list. I'm hoping to begin to set the table to move forward in a more collaborative way, and that we stop doing this by ambush via legal opinion and rule, and that we work collectively as right-minded Oregonians to figure out a solution, particularly if this speaks to an issue of constitutionality. So I would invite any of you to respond. Mr. Applegate.
I would just say requests from the AG's office, maybe through the division, if there's any chance that we can get a level of agreement from the governor's office that our contractors who are partners in this industry can get some assurance that these permits will not be invalidated for any reason whatsoever for the last 45 years we've been doing this service. I think that would be a great opportunity to make them feel more comfortable.
Any other comments? Mr. Jorgensen.
I think it's really important that cities, especially small cities, have as many options as possible, that there not be arbitrary limits set, for example, on the number of cities that could band together to provide these kinds of services. And I think it's absolutely essential that the agencies and the legislature let cities work.
If this is on, additional comment, I think, and thanks for that comment, that is our major concern, is are these permits valid, and not just for the last 45 years, but is there also a line that was drawn when the state realized that they were given an opinion saying that these permits potentially are no longer valid? Is that the start point? Where's the window where the permits potentially are invalid, if they are? And then finally, one other question, and that is, when we do finally hear an answer back from the AG's office, I'm just curious, my understanding is that has the authority of law for the agencies. Is that accurate?
No. I don't know that it has the authority. I think we have to wait to see what the opinion is. We don't know. And then I think we're just going to have to regroup at that point to determine what does it mean.
I've talked to a couple other administrators and folks in state government, and I was told, without regard to this issue, that if the AG in this final opinion says this is what we believe the law is, until that's challenged in court or changed, that is the road they have to go down. Let's put it that way.
Right. So I think a part of that would be, again, whether something is found unconstitutional versus there is some other legal issue, to the point of, is there something that we can change through a legislative process? Is there something that can change through an administrative rule process? Is it truly unconstitutional? I don't know what that opinion will look like and what it will impact. Again, if this is a larger question, that might have a whole different outcome of that, right? If it's way beyond building services of that question, I think that'll be a much broader discussion.
Mr. Dallin?
Yeah. On our list, also the original problems or the fixes that we brought, statutory fixes to put the third party and the contractors on the same playing field statutorily, is make sure we don't lose the small fixes that we originally sought. On the flip side of that coin, on behalf of my clients, I know that we would invite, and I've talked with the trades as well, the electricians and home builders, so that we can demystify some of these places where there have been problems in cities or certain projects, and have that transparency to say, this is the way the city fee structure actually works, this is how our contracts work, so that the construction industry isn't suspect of city programs without seeing kind of the full transparency. So I think we all owe it to each other to provide that. So the small fixes is one, and then the other one, structurally, Senator, is the reality is you have third parties, cities, counties, and the state all competing for the revenue for permits. And it has been a challenge. And again, going back to the $1 million question is, where did the legal opinion come from? We've lost cities over the last year who've said, it's too complicated, we're gonna let BCD take over our program, and that costs our people jobs. So one of the questions is, what should the structure be? Should BCD be promulgating the certifications and the rules so that it can drive its competitors out of business? And at some point, maybe DCBS should take some of that certification process instead of getting it to the permitting arm of BCD.
Ms. Doyle.
The other pieces that I think, coming from first addressing this question of authorities, and I think I'd like to see a long-term commitment to increase transparency, the reduced use of temporary and emergency rulemaking from the department, so that we consistently have clarity and know what the expectations are, both as providers, if we have internal building inspectors and building officials, but also as we oversee the contracts, which is part of our rubric and responsibility. I think that long-term, we'd also like to have a clarification of a lot of the statute. I think ORS 455 has at least 3 different appeals processes, and it's not clear which one applies when. So over the long term, I think the transparency issues can be cleared up if we take a long, hard look through a commitment of everyone impacted by these decision makings to ensure that we're all playing from the same rule book. So that way it isn't a competition and it isn't a fear for the contractors who come in or the trades folks that come in. They know who's in charge of what and what the rules and standards they're going to be facing are, and then a clear process by which they can ask the question of if that person got it right. The other thing that I heard a little bit about is what a building official should be and what their qualifications are, and if there needs to be a conversation about certifications, we need to have that conversation in an open and transparent process as well, instead of just suddenly changing the rules to make you have to have like 25 years of experience, because at that point I don't know that we can afford you at the local level. And then I don't want to lose the fact that we all agreed to a statewide building code because we all agreed that we should get buildings built safely, quickly, and by the same rules. And that's not the challenge we're seeking to have, and that is not something that we've ever wanted to have, but we do want to be able to have that process work well. And if there are other issues that come from this conversation, all of the partners at the table need to be willing to come back and have those conversations, whether it's about the fee structure, the oversight, that type of protocol. But our cities and our counties are doing the best with the resources they have. And one of those resources, as was pointed out, is retiring out of the community. And I would like to see a commitment from the department to open up training so that we can get more folks who can do these inspections to serve as officials that aren't going to retire from the profession in 5 years.
Thank you. Please.
So just a couple of comments just to help clarify a couple of things. And partly, Senator, to your comment about Director Smith's involvement. So just as a clarification, I serve as Deputy Director for the agency, not for BCD. This issue has already elevated to the Director's office, and in building codes issues, the Senator is also seeing Cameron has been more involved in that. So this has been elevated, and truly as an agency, I can speak to whether it's Oregon OSHA, Workers' Comp Division, or Division of Financial Regulation and Health Issues, we do tend to have a very transparent process and our rulemaking in that. So that is that elevation. It has already started. Let me say we have the same issues around inspectors and that. Our agency has already started doing some things of a training academy for inspectors because we're having the same issue of we have inspectors and others that are heading off to communities to do that work. So I think that there was already that start of it. I just wanted to let people know if you didn't know, we're already trying to address some of those issues and trying to look at that transparency and answers for a lot of those things.
Thank you very much for that clarification. We have 15 minutes left, and if I could get a volunteer to come out of the audience and grab a mic, I would invite any comments or questions from the audience. And while that is occurring, assuming someone wants to speak, I would ask our legislators, do you have any concluding comments?
Yes, I've participated in many work groups over the years, and I can tell you I think this is one of the most efficient I've been in. You're seeing how this process actually is supposed to work. I want to thank Ms. Reynolds, Mr. Hinkle, and Mr. Jorgensen for taking time out of your work days to come here and put a true face of what is going on with this problem and how it's impacted.
Mr. Mannix, would you bring him?
And Commissioner, thank you for being here as well, Mr. Bozovich, for taking the time. This is really important. When the bell rang in the spring and everybody's phones started ringing, I mean, we all took this very seriously and jumped on it, and I want to thank Senator Johnson. We formed a work group at the legislature. It sounds as though we may have two, and again, we do need to streamline this and organize it and make sure we've got everybody at the table that we need at the table. Thank you for our attorneys who are interested in moving through this and getting engaged. What I hear is we need to provide safe, efficient, cost-effective, and valid permits. That's the whole goal, so we can get building done and people in homes and businesses operating. That's what the whole goal of this thing is. And I think we're on the right track. So, Senator Johnson, thank you for convening this. Thank you for getting us, I think, on the right track. And let's go back to the legislature with the help of the agency, potentially the governor's office, and everybody else that we need in the room to solve this.
Okay. We have one comment from the public. Mr. Mannix.
Thank you, Senator. I'm Kevin Mannix. I'm a former Oregon Assistant Attorney General, former Assistant Attorney General for the U.S. Territory of Guam, a former Oregon Administrative Law Judge, and then I've been in private practice since. I also served 10 years in the legislature, on the Judiciary, and Ways and Means and Labor Committees, and I mentioned that to and add some credibility to what I'm about to say. The Attorney General of Oregon is a creature of statute, not a constitutional officer. The entire setup of the Attorney General's office is set by statute. If there were no statute, there would be no Attorney General. Our Secretary of State and our Treasurer and our Governor are creatures of statute, so they have their independent constitutional authority. Why do I mention that? Being a creature of statute, the Attorney General is also subject to whatever the legislature may do by way of statute in terms of the power of the Attorney General. In terms of attorney-client privilege, it is the client who holds the privilege as to an attorney's opinion. If a department does not wish to have a transparent process as to an opinion it has received, it can refuse to waive the privilege. But it is the department, not the Attorney General, who holds that privilege. And I would first ask DCPS, as that department or its Building Codes Division, if this opinion has not been available, to waive the attorney-client privilege, which they get to decide to do, not the Attorney General, and then that opinion and any other material that they waive has to be made available. And that helps inform the legislature as to what is going on in this process where something has arisen after 35 years of unchallenged practice. I offer this up because I think that we need to step back and look at this. If we're talking about a constitutional issue, how it got presented, who presented it, how that opinion was presented, and then understand, and I'm the one who was naughty and said no and said the department has to follow the opinion of the Attorney General, When I was practicing law as an assistant attorney general, we had a department that did not wish to follow the advice of the attorney general. And the attorney general said, well, you're the client. Now, clients are protected when they follow an attorney's advice, but they may decide they don't want to. And in that instance, the attorney general said, well, you can find another attorney to represent you, or you can act on your own. This is our opinion that we are offering to the government under ORS Chapter 183. And if building inspectors can't exercise discretion under contract, how about all those ALJs who have been under contract issuing decisions? So I'll stop there, and I just wanted to offer that up, and I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Anybody else in the audience moved by the spirit of public comment? Okay, I see none. Any other panelists want to get the concluding remark? Mr. Dahlem, you are crouched over that microphone like you want the last word.
I have a bad back. I always would take the last word, but want to thank everybody again, offer our willingness and everyone I know to work through this. And I think Mr. Mannix makes a great point. Is the agency never had to ask for this opinion, and so I think asking the hard questions and getting us all to the table to solve the problem so we can get construction and housing happening is what everybody up here wants. So thank you so much to the Coastal Caucus for spending a lot of time and staff putting this together over the last 2.5 months and before that. So thank you to all of you.
You end up with the penultimate. Mr. Brock Smith ends up with the ultimate.
Thank you. And I just want to thank you, Senator, for once again facilitating a fantastic conversation on a serious issue. Appreciate the colleagues. And this is our last opportunity to say thank you to all of you that are out there for coming to the 7th Annual Oregon Coastal Caucus Economic Summit. We really appreciate your participation on yesterday's issues and today's issues. And thank you very much.
And on that note, we stand adjourned. Thank you, panelists, for your time and trouble in coming here.